So, get this, my dad tied the knot with a gold digger just 2 years before he passed, and now she's acting like she owns everything he left behind. But here's the kicker, she has no idea the estate she's eyeing doesn't even belong to him. It's mine. Anyway, let me lay it out for you. Dad's heading into hospice next week, and honestly, it's been rough for a while. We all knew the day was coming, but knowing doesn't make it any easier, does it? The weirdest part? The house where he's been living with his wife Marla and her 2 daughters, Alyssa and Chloe, that place isn't even in his name. I bought it. Paid for it with my own money years back. You sure wouldn't guess that from how they strut around, acting like it's theirs. But I'm jumping ahead. Let me backtrack a bit. It all really started around 7 years ago after my mom passed. Life just kind of knocked the wind out of my dad. They'd been together for over 3 decades, and when she died, it absolutely shattered him. We were all grieving, but my dad, he completely fell apart. A few months later, he lost his job, couldn't keep up with rent, and ended up evicted from their apartment. Everything just collapsed at once. And with no one else to turn to, I was the only one he had left. I was in a position to help, so I stepped up and bought him a house. It wasn't anything flashy, just a modest little place in a quiet, older part of town. Nothing fancy, but it was clean, safe, and most importantly, it gave him some stability when he really needed it. And he had his dog, Rusty. That dog meant the world to him, honestly, to all of us. Rusty was like the last piece of my mom still hanging around. She adored that dog, and after she was gone, Rusty became my dad's anchor. For the first few years, things were actually okay. My dad was slowly pulling himself together, and the house became his little retreat from the chaos. Rusty was always there, tail wagging, just keeping him company. I made it a point to visit every weekend. It became a ritual, me, him, and Rusty hanging out in the backyard, grilling burgers, catching up on life, and just trying to find a little joy again. And then Marla showed up. They met through some mutual acquaintances, and before I even had time to really form an opinion, they were married. I didn't object or anything. If she made him happy, who was I to stand in the way? At first, Marla seemed totally fine. Friendly, respectful, always smiling. She acted like she genuinely cared about my dad. So when he told me she'd be moving in, I didn't raise any flags. It was his choice, even if technically the house was mine. What mattered most was his happiness. But then things started to shift. First, it was just Marla. No problem. But not long after, her daughter Alyssa moved in, bags and all, like it was the most normal thing in the world. She wasn't a teenager crashing for the weekend. She was nearly 30. And she came ready to stay. I kept my mouth shut. It was still my dad's life, and I wanted to respect that. But I won't lie, it felt off. Then, bit by bit, Marla's stuff started spreading through the house. Each time I visited, I noticed more and more of her things. The place didn't feel like my dad's home anymore, it felt like hers. Still, I tried to let it slide. If he was happy, that's what mattered. But just when I thought it couldn't get more crowded, Chloe, Marla's younger daughter, moved in too. Now the house was packed, Marla, Alyssa, Chloe, and my dad all living under one roof. You can probably guess how well that went. At first, I told myself to stay out of it. Yeah, it was strange seeing my dad get slowly pushed out of his own space, but I didn't feel like I had the right to interfere. Then the energy in the house started to shift. It got tense. Suddenly, my dad's voice didn't carry much weight. Everything revolved around Marla and what her daughters wanted. It was like my dad didn't matter in his own home anymore. And just when I thought the whole thing couldn't get more frustrating, the situation with Rusty hit me like a slap in the face. Let me tell you something about that dog, he wasn't just some pet. Rusty was family. My mom adored him, treated him like one of her own kids. And after she passed, Rusty was the one constant that helped keep my dad afloat. People who don't understand the bond you can have with a dog probably think I'm being dramatic. But if you've ever loved a dog, really loved one, then you get it. So imagine how I felt when Chloe, the youngest, started complaining about Rusty. Seriously? Rusty was the gentlest old guy you could imagine. He spent most of the day either napping or spinning in lazy circles chasing his tail. He was harmless. Then one day, completely out of nowhere, Chloe pipes up about how Rusty makes her uncomfortable. She said she didn't feel safe with him in the house. I mean, come on, this dog was 12 years old and could barely climb the stairs without taking a break. He was about as threatening as a teddy bear. At first, I figured she was just being overly sensitive. But then Marla backed her up like clockwork. Suddenly, it turned into a full-blown issue. Marla started suggesting that maybe it was time to rehome Rusty like he was some worn-out piece of furniture. That's when I lost it. My dad wasn't just being told to give up a dog. He was being told to give up one of the last pieces of my mom. It tore me up to see how much it hurt him. But I wasn't living there, and Marla had pretty much taken over all the decision-making. I could see it in his eyes. He didn't want to do it. But he was worn down, physically and emotionally. He didn't have the strength to fight anymore. So I stepped in. I told my dad straight up that Rusty was coming to live with me. No way I was letting Marla and her daughters bully him into giving up that dog. Dad looked relieved, but I could tell it still hurt. Giving up Rusty wasn't what he wanted, it was just the only way to stop the arguing. And of course, Marla acted like she was being so generous letting me take the dog. But I knew better. This wasn't about Rusty. It was about control. They wanted full reign over everything, every choice, every detail. Rusty was just one more thing to push my dad out of his own life. After that, whenever I came to visit, I brought Rusty along. And every time, it was like I'd shown up with a wild animal. Alyssa and Chloe would act like he was going to attack them any second. The first time I showed up with Rusty after taking him in, Chloe actually let out a full-on scream, as if she hadn't been living under the same roof with that dog for the past few years. Marla tried to smooth it over like it was no big deal, but I caught her rolling her eyes every single time I walked in with Rusty trailing behind me. It was just absurd. Rusty would shuffle in, tail wagging like always, totally ignoring them, and yet all they could do was whine about how dangerous he was. Meanwhile, I'd be out back with my dad, like always, just sitting in lawn chairs while Rusty stretched out in the grass without a care in the world. Still, Chloe or Alyssa would peek through the window, shoot us this disgusted look, and disappear like Rusty was some kind of wild animal on the loose. Truthfully, I think it wasn't about Rusty at all. It was the fact that he reminded them this place wasn't really theirs. He was a living piece of my dad's past, a connection to my mom, to our family. No matter how hard they tried to push my dad out of the picture, Rusty was the piece they couldn't erase. And then, sure enough, Marla finally came out and said what I'd known was coming. She looked me dead in the eye and asked if I could stop bringing Rusty over. I was furious. Why? I asked her. He's not doing anything. He just lies there. She tried to cushion it with that fake sweet tone, something about Chloe still being uncomfortable and how it would just be easier if Rusty stayed away. But I wasn't buying it. This had nothing to do with the dog. It was about control. Bit by bit, Marla and her daughters had chipped away at everything that mattered to my dad. And now they were aiming for the last thing left, Rusty. I was boiling inside, but I didn't want to add more stress to my dad's plate. He was already sick, already dealing with too much. So I kept it measured and said to her, Rusty's staying. He's not bothering a soul. And if you've got a problem with it, maybe don't come outside when I'm here. That didn't sit well with her, not one bit. I could see it in her face. She wanted to keep pushing, but I wasn't giving her an inch. From that point on, every single visit, Rusty came with me. I didn't care what they thought anymore. My dad deserved that much peace at least. Things got even more tense after that. You could feel it in the air. Marla and her girls were clearly just biding their time, waiting for my dad to fade so they could swoop in and take everything. I saw how they treated him, like he was just a burden taking up space. But as long as Rusty and I kept showing up, they couldn't push him out completely. Now that my dad's heading into hospice, I can see where this is all headed. They think they've won. They think the house and everything in it is about to be theirs. But they're in for one hell of a surprise. This place? Still mine. And Rusty? That old dog's going to outlast every one of them. I'm sure of it. With Dad going into hospice soon, I knew I didn't have much time left to say a real goodbye. I'd been dreading that moment, but it was one I couldn't avoid anymore. He wasn't doing well, and I owed it to both of them, Dad and Rusty, to let them see each other one more time before things went downhill. So I loaded Rusty up and headed over. When I walked in, Marla, Alyssa, and Chloe were already there. And man, you could feel the chill the second we stepped through the door. You ever walk into a room and suddenly everyone goes silent? That's exactly what it felt like. The atmosphere was tense, but I didn't care. I wasn't there for them. I was there for my dad. Alyssa spoke first. She shot a look at Rusty, scrunched up her face and said, "Oh great, he brought that stupid dog again." Didn't even try to hide her attitude. She was acting like Rusty was some vicious beast, when the poor guy could barely walk without stopping for a break. He was slow, gentle, and harmless. But there she was, putting on her usual show, pretending he was going to destroy the furniture or something. I just took a breath and kept walking. No way was I wasting energy on her drama. "I'm here to see Dad," I said, and headed straight down the hall. As I passed, I heard Marla mutter something to Chloe under her breath. I didn't catch what she said, but I could guess. Probably some snarky little comment about me or Rusty. I let it roll off. When I got to my dad's room, he was lying in bed, looking tired and frail, but still awake. And the moment he saw me walk in, his eyes lit up. But when Rusty patted in behind me, tail wagging, my dad's whole face softened in a way I hadn't seen in weeks. It hit me hard how much he'd missed him. Rusty made his way over to the bed and, despite how stiff and slow he'd gotten, managed to climb up beside my dad. He curled up next to him like he always had. My dad reached over and gently scratched behind Rusty's ears, just like he used to do back in the day. And for a little while, everything felt normal again. We didn't need words right away. Sometimes silence says more. I just sat with them, my dad on one side, Rusty between us, and soaked in the moment. I could tell Dad was weaker than last time I saw him. It hurt to see him like that, but at the same time there was comfort too. For the first time in a while, he looked genuinely at peace. Eventually, he broke the silence. "I've missed this old guy," he said, voice shaky but warm. "It's good to see him again." I just nodded, didn't trust myself to speak without cracking. I reached over and gave Rusty a gentle pat, trying to hold myself together. We talked a bit after that, nothing heavy. Just old stories, memories, little moments from when Mom was still around. A few things about Rusty that made us both smile. Felt good. It also felt like a goodbye. I knew it might be the last time I'd see him like that. Awake, present, still himself. And even though I'd seen it coming, that thought hit me hard. And then, right on cue, Marla barged in and wrecked the moment. Didn't even bother to knock. She walked in, took one look at Rusty curled up next to my dad, and scowled like I'd brought in a stray coyote. "I thought I told you not to bring that dog here," she snapped, arms folded, her tone sharp and accusing. Like I'd broken some law. I could feel the anger rise in my chest, but I kept it steady. "Rusty's not hurting anyone," I said, calmly but firmly. "He's here to say goodbye to Dad," I said, my voice firm but calm. "You got a problem with that?" Chloe, who had followed Marla into the room, muttered just loud enough for me to hear. "Good riddance. I'm glad we won't have to deal with him anymore." That was it, I'd reached my limit. I stood up, doing my best to keep my composure, but I was boiling inside. "You know what?" I said, locking eyes with both of them. "I don't care what either of you thinks about Rusty. He's family, and as long as I'm here, he's staying. Don't like it? Too bad." Marla looked like she was about to fire back, but before she could say a word, my dad quietly spoke up. "It's fine," he said, his voice soft but steady. "Let them be." And just like that, Marla backed off. She didn't push it, not with my dad saying it directly. I stayed a little longer, mostly to give Rusty and my dad as much time together as possible. I knew deep down this might be the last time they'd see each other. I wanted that final visit to end on a peaceful note. On my way out, I passed through the living room where Alyssa was lounging, scrolling through her phone without a care. She barely looked up as I walked by, but right as I reached the front door, she said, "Can't wait till we never have to see that dog again." I stopped for a second, turned to look at her, and considered whether she was worth responding to. Then I simply said, "You won't have to," and walked out. I wasn't going to waste another second of my life on them. Driving home, my thoughts were a whirlwind. It wasn't just about Rusty, it never had been. It was about the whole damn situation. About how my dad's home had been slowly turned into someone else's territory. About how Marla and her daughters had steamrolled their way into his life and acted like they belonged there. And the worst part? They didn't even seem to care that he was dying. It was like they were just killing time, waiting for the end so they could move on and claim what they thought was theirs. But they were in for a shock. That house? It's not theirs. And when the time comes, they're going to find that out the hard way. Update 1. After that last visit with my dad, I knew something had to give. I couldn't keep dancing around Marla and her daughters, letting them pretend they owned the place while I stood there like a guest in my own property. My dad wasn't getting any better. The writing was on the wall. And I knew that once he was gone, Marla and her girls would expect to stay in the house like nothing had changed, just keep living there, rent-free, like they'd been doing for years. But that wasn't going to fly. Still, instead of dropping the hammer right away and telling them the house was mine, I decided to ease into it. Start small. See how they reacted to the idea of, "Oh, I don't know, paying rent." Maybe, just maybe, they'd step up and act like adults. I wasn't holding my breath. So a few days after that emotional visit, I went back over to the house. Walked in to find the three of them lounging in the living room, same as always. They were laughing at something on some trashy reality show, completely detached from the reality that my dad was in hospice care. It made my blood boil. I took a deep breath and stepped into the room. Alyssa glanced up for half a second, then looked right back at the TV. Marla paused the show, clearly annoyed that I'd interrupted whatever nonsense they were watching. "Can we talk for a minute?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Marla raised one brow, arms crossed. "About what?" "About what's going to happen after my dad passes," I said. That snapped their attention real quick. All the grins vanished, and suddenly I had all eyes on me. "Perfect. I've been giving it some thought," I continued, "and we need to talk about the house. Specifically rent." The word hit the room like a sledgehammer. Chloe actually laughed like I just told the world's worst joke. "Rent? Are you serious?" she scoffed. I didn't let it rattle me. "Yes. Once Dad passes, things are going to change. If you want to keep living here, you're going to need to pay rent. I've already talked to a lawyer and calculated a fair market rate." Chloe gave me a look like I just personally insulted her. Alyssa leaned forward, about to say something snarky, but Marla beat her to it. "Hold on a second," Marla snapped, narrowing her eyes. "Why would we need to pay rent? Richard wanted us here." I nodded, keeping my voice calm. "I understand that. But I've been the one paying the bills on this house for years. And that's not going to continue after he's gone. You've had a good situation here for a long time. But that's changing." I let the silence settle in. "You'll need to start paying rent, or you'll need to make other arrangements," I added. The room went completely quiet. Marla's face was stiff, her eyes searching mine, trying to figure out if I was bluffing. Alyssa and Chloe looked like they'd just been hit with cold water. Clearly, the thought of paying to live in that house had never even crossed their minds. And why would it? They'd been freeloading off my dad and technically me for years. Eventually, Marla spoke, her tone sharp and defensive. "This is Richard's house. He wanted us here. You're really going to charge us rent after everything we've done for him?" I clenched my jaw but kept it together. "Look, I'm not trying to make this harder than it has to be. But someone has to cover the expenses. And I'm done being that someone. I've already paid for everything up until now. After he's gone, it's your responsibility." Alyssa finally snapped. "You're unbelievable. We've lived here for years and now you want to make money off us? What kind of person does that to family?" I let out a breath, trying not to let her bait me. "This isn't about making money. It's about being fair. I'm not throwing anyone out yet. You'll have 3 months after Dad passes to decide what you want to do. That's more than generous." Chloe crossed her arms and glared. "So what, you'll just kick us out if we don't pay?" I met her stare head on. "If you're not willing to pay rent, yeah, you'll have to move. I can't keep footing the bill." That's when Marla stood up, ready to play the martyr. "I can't believe you do this to us. After everything we've done for Richard, for this family. You're just going to throw us out like trash." I shook my head. "I'm not throwing anyone out. I'm giving you a choice. But this arrangement? It ends soon. You need to be ready. I'm giving you 3 months to figure things out," I told them flatly. "That's more than fair." Alyssa looked like she was about to fire off another one of her smart remarks, but I was done wasting breath. I'd said my piece. No more back and forth. Before they could hit me with another round of whining or guilt trips, I turned and walked straight to the door. As I stepped outside, I could still hear their voices behind me, probably scheming, trying to find a loophole, some way to keep squatting in that house for free. But I wasn't budging. They had 2 choices now, pay rent or move out. And in 3 months, that decision was going to come knocking whether they liked it or not. What they didn't know yet, what would really knock them off their high horse, was that the house had never even belonged to my dad in the first place. Update 2. It all happened quicker than I expected. One day, Dad was still hanging on, fighting with what little strength he had left, and the next, he was gone. Even though I'd seen it coming, it still hit me like someone had knocked the wind out of me. Watching him fade like that was gut-wrenching, but at least now he wasn't in pain anymore. He was finally at peace. But peace didn't last long. Because after the funeral, I had to face what came next. And surprise, surprise, Marla and her daughters acted like nothing had changed. It was almost like they'd been waiting for this moment. Like now that my dad was out of the picture, they could finally take over without resistance. They looked ready, like they thought the house was just going to fall into their laps. They had no idea what was coming. I gave it a few days after the funeral out of basic decency, but I wasn't going to wait much longer. I knew if I didn't act fast, they'd dig their heels in and try to make the place theirs permanently. I had different plans. So I drove over. When I walked in, the 3 of them, Marla, Alyssa, and Chloe were planted in the living room like royalty on their thrones. The TV was blaring and they were laughing at whatever trashy show they were watching like the man who had given them a home hadn't just died. Not a single tear. Not even a hint of grief. I stood there for a moment, just watching. It felt surreal. How could they act like this? My dad had barely been in the ground and they were acting like it was just another lazy Sunday. I cleared my throat, finally stepping inside. Marla looked over at me but didn't say a word. Alyssa and Chloe stayed quiet too, like they were waiting for me to say something, probably thinking I was there to discuss some final arrangements or whatever. I took a deep breath. "We need to talk about the house," I said. Marla's face twisted in confusion. "What do you mean? We already talked about this. We're staying here. It's what Richard wanted." There it was. That smug entitlement I'd come to expect. My jaw tightened, but I kept my voice level. "No, we haven't talked about this. You assumed you were staying. But the truth is you're not. This house wasn't my dad's to give. It's mine." You could have heard a pin drop. The shock on Marla's face was almost comical. She blinked once, twice, like her brain couldn't quite process what I'd said. "What are you talking about?" she finally asked. "Richard never told me that. This is our home." I let out a dry laugh. "Yeah, well, he didn't have to. I bought this house after he lost his apartment after Mom died. It's been in my name the whole time. He lived here, yes. But now that he's gone, it reverts back to me. And that means your time here is up." Alyssa sprang to her feet, fury all over her face. "You can't just throw us out. We've been living here for years." "This isn't your home," I replied, keeping my voice even. "You've been living here rent-free because of my dad. But now that he's gone, so is that arrangement. You either pay rent or you leave. You've got 3 months. They sat there stunned. Marla's eyes welled up, but she blinked the tears away and replaced them with anger. "You can't do this," she snapped. "Richard wanted us here. You're going against his wishes." "I'm sorry," I said, not because I meant it, but because I wanted to end this quickly. "But it doesn't work like that. Legally, this is my house. You've taken advantage of my father long enough. It stops here." Marla tried to argue, but I was done listening. The room was thick with tension, but I wasn't backing off. I reached into my bag and pulled out the legal documents. "I've already spoken to my lawyer," I added, holding the papers out. "If you don't believe me, here it is in writing. Black and white. I own this place, not you and not my dad." I laid the documents on the table. "You've got 3 months to figure out your next move. After that, if you're still here, I'll move forward with a formal eviction." Chloe just sat there, eyes wide, staring at the papers like they were written in another language. This can't be real," she muttered, glancing toward Marla like she expected her to fix it. But Marla had nothing. I could see it in her face. She knew the game was over. Alyssa started pacing, hands on her hips, face flushed with anger. "You've got to be kidding me. After everything we've done for Richard, you're just going to kick us out." I almost laughed again. "Everything you've done? You mean bossing him around, disrespecting him, pressuring him to get rid of Rusty, and treating him like an inconvenience in his own home? Yeah, that's some legacy you left behind." They all started talking at once, throwing out excuses, playing the victim, trying to spin the narrative, but I tuned it out. I'd heard enough lies and self-pity from them to last a lifetime. "I've said what I came to say," I told them, stepping back toward the front door. "You've got 3 months. After that, we'll see." As I walked out, their voices were still echoing behind me, arguing, panicking, grasping for a lifeline. But it wasn't my problem anymore. They'd spent years leeching off my dad and off me. Now, they were going to have to stand on their own for once. And as I stepped outside, a heavy weight lifted off my chest. It wasn't going to be easy, none of this was, but I knew without a doubt that I was doing the right thing. They'd gotten too comfortable in a house that never belonged to them. That ends now. And soon enough, they'll be gone for good. Update 3. So, after laying it out for Marla and her daughters, either start paying rent or pack your things, I figured that was the end of it. I mean, what more could they possibly pull? I had the law on my side, the title deed in my name, and I'd given them more time than most people would have. 3 whole months. That seemed more than generous to me. Apparently, Marla didn't see it that way. Because, believe it or not, she tried to sue me. Yeah, you heard that right. She actually went and got herself a lawyer, filed a lawsuit, and claimed she had the right to stay in the house because she was my dad's wife and that he had promised it to her after he passed. When I got served the papers at work, I just stood there staring at them like, "You've got to be kidding me." I almost laughed out loud. She knew damn well the house wasn't his to give. I had shown her the paperwork, sat down and calmly explained everything, gave her more time than I probably should have, and this is how she thanked me? By trying to drag me into court? Look, I've never been a fan of legal battles. It's all a bunch of paperwork, appointments, and stress. But I wasn't too worried. My lawyer was already looped in and ready to go. We had every document we needed to shut this down before it even got traction. So I called him up. He took it all in stride, cool as ever. Said he sees this kind of thing more than you'd think. After looking over the documents Marla filed, he basically said she's got no case. This won't go far. Still, it ticked me off that I had to deal with it at all. After everything, they'd lived in that house rent-free for years, freeloading off my dad and me. And now she had the audacity to sue me? The case dragged on for a couple of months. Marla tried every angle she could. Claimed my dad had promised her the house. That she'd built her life there. Tried playing the grieving widow card like I was some cold-hearted guy kicking her out into the street. Meanwhile, she conveniently left out the part where she and her daughters ran the place like a sorority house, treated my dad like a visitor in his own home, and tried to get rid of his dog, the one thing he had left that reminded him of my mom. But of course, none of that made it into her story. I kept my cool through it all. Sat through every hearing. Let my lawyer do the talking, and he crushed it. We came armed with the title, the bank records, everything showing that I'd bought the house and it had always been in my name. Every time Marla's lawyer brought up some imaginary promise, we hit them with cold, irrefutable facts. One of the more laughable moments came when Marla claimed she'd made improvements to the home and should be compensated. Improvements? The house looked worse than when I bought it. If anything, they'd let it fall apart. My lawyer jumped on that right away and the judge shut it down almost immediately. Then, just to add to the circus, Alyssa and Chloe showed up in court like they were victims. Alyssa went on about how it was their home and how unfair it all was. Meanwhile, I'm sitting there thinking, you mean the home you've never paid a single dime to live in? Yeah. Okay. I wanted to say something. God, did I? But my lawyer gave me that side-eye warning and I bit my tongue. Didn't take long for the judge to make a call. He saw right through the act. He laid it out clearly. Marla had no legal right to the house. There was no will, no written agreement, no deed. Nothing to back her claim. The house was mine, had always been mine, and that meant Marla and her daughters had to go. I wasn't surprised, not one bit. I knew this was how it would play out. The whole lawsuit was just a desperate, last-ditch attempt to cling to something that never belonged to them in the first place. The judge gave them 2 weeks. That was it. 2 weeks to move out before I could start the formal eviction process. When we walked out of the courtroom, Marla wouldn't even look at me. Just stormed out with Alyssa and Chloe trailing behind her, all three of them acting like I was the villain in their soap opera. But I didn't feel bad. Not even a little. I had given them chance after chance. I'd been patient. I gave them time. I gave them dignity. And they tried to screw me anyway. In the end, though, they didn't have a leg to stand on. They packed up and left before the deadline. No more texts. No more calls. They vanished completely, and I was honestly grateful. That chapter was closed. The nightmare was finally over. The house was mine again. Quiet. Peaceful. Just the way it used to be. Yeah, the whole ordeal was exhausting. Draining even. But I walked away with my head held high and, more importantly, with the house intact and free from their drama. As for Marla, she lost. She could believe whatever fantasy she wanted about promises and entitlement. But the law was the law. And this time, the truth was on my side. So yeah, she tried to sue me. She lost. Now the house is mine again. And they're gone. And honestly, that's all I ever wanted.